Chapter 5 Alligator Attack. When Bess heard about the missing photograph of Mr. Drew, she ran from the living room and up the stairs. Deep in her suitcase, she had left a snapshot of herself with Nancy, George, Ned, Bert, and Dave. Bess rifled through the clothes still in the bag, but could not find the picture. That was stolen too, she told herself, and hurried back downstairs to tell the others. George said angrily, "Nobody has been in this house. We locked all the doors and windows before we left, and they were still locked when we came home. I'm sure the Rizzardos took those pictures." Everyone agreed, but Mr. Drew warned them that they had no evidence to prove this. "Why don't we search their room?" George asked. Before anybody could stop her, she bounded up the stairway to the couple's quarters. But the Rizzardos' door was locked, and continuous knocking on it brought no response. Dejected, George returned to the first floor. "Now what do we do?" she asked Nancy. "Suppose I phone the orange sorting and packing house. Anton may be there." The worker who answered said that Anton had not been in all day. "He didn't tell us he wasn't coming, so we have no idea where he is." Nancy thanked him and hung up. The Rizzardos returned just as the group was about to eat dinner. "Where have you been all day?" George burst out. Tina and Anton scowled, but replied they had received word a relative in a distant city was ill and had gone to visit him. The couple turned toward the stove and picked up 2 dinner plates which were warming. As they helped themselves from each of the pots, Mr. Drew approached them. "1 minute," he said. "What can you tell us about all the photographs missing from the house?" The Rizzardos looked at each other. Then Anton said, "What are you talking about?" When Mr. Drew explained, Anton declared he knew nothing about the pictures. Tina spoke up. "I don't either. Are you accusing us of taking them?" She began to laugh raucously. "What would we want with photographs of you people?" Mr. Drew turned on his heel and walked into the dining room. The Rizzardos filled 2 plates, got out some silver, and sat down at the kitchen table to eat. The others were surprised that they had not gone upstairs. Nancy, however, figured the couple wanted to hear the conversation in the dining room. In a whisper, she warned the rest not to discuss the Billington case. If the Rizzardos had hoped to pick up any information, they were disappointed. The talk was general, mostly about the fascinating trip through the Space Center. When everyone finished eating, the Rizzardos piled their dirty dishes in the sink as usual and went up to their room. "I won't wash them," Hannah Gruen said firmly. Nancy smiled. "Tonight you're not washing anybody's dishes. You go into the living room and watch TV. Bess and George and I will take care of everything." While the girls were doing this, Mr. Drew telephoned the police to report the theft of the photographs. 2 officers came to the house. They agreed that it appeared to be an inside job and asked to talk with the Rizzardos. The couple vehemently declared their innocence. As the police were leaving, they told Mr. Drew that without any clues there was little hope of apprehending the thief. Tina and Anton cast black looks at the others, then went upstairs without saying goodnight. In the morning, when Nancy and her friends came downstairs, she found that the Rizzardos had already eaten breakfast and left the house. Their dirty dishes were piled up in the sink. Hannah Gruen stared at the dried egg on the plates and the stained coffee cups in disgust. But she said nothing and started getting breakfast for the others. When Mr. Drew came down, Nancy said, "Dad, I haven't had a chance to tell you about a darling house that's for sale." She described the Webster property. He smiled at her enthusiasm. "I'll look at it," he said. "I can see you've fallen in love with the place." While they were eating, a telephone call came from Mr. Drew. After a few minutes' conversation, he returned to the table and said he must leave for River Heights. "Something important has come up and I'll have to return home at once. Will you girls drive me to the airport?" "Of course," Nancy replied. "Do you want me to call and see about planes?" "If you will, please." Nancy found out that if they left the house within 10 minutes, her father could catch a non-stop flight to New York from Melbourne and get another plane to River Heights soon afterward. She hurried upstairs to tell her father and help him pack. When Mr. Drew and the girls were ready to leave, he said to Hannah, "Take care. Better lock yourself in." The housekeeper nodded. 2 hours later, the girls were ready to return from the Melbourne airport. Bess spoke up. "Let's take a scenic route home." "All right," Nancy agreed. She consulted a road map and figured out what direction to take. As they neared the area of the Cape, Bess spotted a long, wide ditch of water choked with water hyacinths, with bluish-violet lily-type blossoms. "Oh, I want to get some of those," she said. "Please stop." "They are pretty," Nancy agreed and pulled up to the side of the road. Bess jumped from the car and went over to pick some of the blooms. After plucking several, she laid them at the edge of the water. "Don't lean over so far, or you'll fall in," George warned her cousin. Bess rested on her heels and reached for another beautiful flower. Just as her hand touched it, something rustled among the leaves. The next moment, an alligator thrust its snout from among the leaves and opened its jaws wide. Bess screamed, jerked back, and sat down hard on the muddy bank. The alligator moved toward her. Terrified, Bess scrambled up and ran to the car. The alligator disappeared under the water hyacinths. Nancy and George had hopped from the car to help her in. Bess was trembling and now began to sob. He was going to bite me," the frightened girl exclaimed. Nancy and George tried to calm her. In a few minutes, Bess was all right, but her white slacks were wet and muddy. To take her mind off the unpleasant incident, Nancy said, "As soon as you change your clothes, Bess, let's go see the real estate agent who is handling the sale of the Webster house. I want to look at the inside. After that, we'll work on the explosive orange mystery." "Good idea," said George. "Who is the realtor?" "Mr. Scarlett." When they reached the Billingtons, it did not take Bess long to change to dark blue slacks and a clean shirt. After a quick lunch, the girls set off again. They drove directly to Mr. Scarlett's office. Nancy parked and they walked up to the one-story building, then stopped short. A sign tacked to the door read, "Closed for vacation. Will open in 2 weeks." "We can't stay that long," said Bess. "I know," Nancy agreed. "Wait here, girls." She went to a nearby store and asked where Mr. Scarlett lived. She hoped the realtor was not out of town. "He didn't tell me his plans," said the storekeeper, and gave her the address of Mr. and Mrs. Scarlett. When the girls rang his doorbell, there was no answer. Windows were closed and blinds were down. "Maybe they're only away for the day," George said optimistically. Nancy was determined to see the inside of the Webster house and told herself, "I'll find a way." George remarked, "Normally a realtor wouldn't go away without making provisions for prospective buyers to see properties he has listed." On the way back to the Billington house, Bess gave a tremendous sigh. "Can't we relax and play some tennis?" she asked. "Then we'll go sleuthing." "Great idea," said George. "I'll take on both of you." Bess giggled. "How we hate ourselves," she teased. "Just for that, I accept. Nancy and I will whitewash you. 3 love sets in a row." Bess came near being right. She and Nancy won the first 2 games. By the time the girls had finished 3 sets, The scores stood 2 sets for Nancy and Bess, and 1 for George. "I'll get even another time," George vowed with a wide grin. As they walked from the court, the cousins asked Nancy what was next on the schedule. "You're so good at keeping your mind on 2 things at once," said Bess, "that half your brain was playing tennis and the other half conjuring up something." Nancy laughed. "I was just thinking that if I call Dad's friend, Commander Nickel, at the base, he'll give me the name of the guard who admitted the driver with the explosive oranges." "And after that?" George prodded her. "After that," Nancy replied, "we'll try to talk to that man." Commander Nickel said the guard's name was Patrick Croft. "He has been dismissed," the commander went on, "but hasn't left town. He's at home," and gave Nancy the address. After she had said goodbye, Nancy turned to the girls. "Let's go. Maybe by talking to Mr. Croft, we can get a clue to the man who impersonated Mr. Billington and drove into the base." End of chapter 5.